Okay, well, thank you all for being here. My name is Jean Allman, and I direct the Center for the Humanities, and I'm one of two PIs on the Divided City Initiative, and we're in our fourth year. When we put together our initial proposal, we had a particular idea of how to interact with grad students, and it wasn't a very sustainable one in terms of building community. So we asked for reallocation. We asked that we be able to create a cohort of students each year for 2 years who would have summer research experiences and then kind of move through the following year as participants in our city seminar. So everybody was off. They were busy this summer, and we're super excited to hear their short. And what's the name of the PechaKucha presentations, which we hope will keep things moving, and we don't want to break that flow, so we're just going to go one by one, and then we'll have a conversation after. And Tila who's the project coordinator, who everybody knows, will have a few words to say, and then we'll get going.
Hi, welcome everybody. I actually don't have that much to say because I think Jean said it all. Just a word about the handouts on your seats. They have the complete list of all of our summer graduate research fellows in the order that they will be presenting, starting with Wasim. That's the first page. I know it's not numbered. And yeah, as Jean said, these are short PechaKucha style presentations, which is a format that is limited, I think, to under 7 minutes and a certain number of slides. So we thought this would be a good format for the number of presentations we have, and I'm excited to hear about all the work that our fellows did this summer. So we'll start with Wasim.
My name is Wasim Ahmed bin Qasim. I'm a PhD student, PhD candidate at History Department, and my dissertation is called Sanitary Segregation, Cleansing Accra and Nairobi between 1908 and 1963. So I use sanitary segregation as a unit of analysis for my dissertation. Sanitary segregation sort of suggests the idea that contagious diseases could be contained and prevented through residential and commercial separation. During the Second Empire, in the 20th century, sanitary segregation played out along lines of race and then class. So I'm sort of trying to compare two different forms of colonialisms that occurred in Africa. The first one is the non-settler colonies, which were some kind of imperial domination and economic integration, and they were just different from those that were settler colonies, which had another component to them. Which had another component to them, and that was sort of like Europeans settling in these places as their permanent home. So I have examples of settler colonies and the non-settler colonies. Over there we have Ghana and then South Africa. For my research, I'm looking at Ghana, which is on the west side of Africa, and then Kenya, to the east side of Africa. My research approaches the British imperial project in Ghana and Kenya through the historical development of their capital cities, where the ideologies and structures of non-settler and settler colonies manifested really clearly. Ghana was referred to as the Gold Coast until 1957, and Kenya, the East African Protectorate, until 1920. The capitals of Accra and Nairobi differed in terms of foundation, the stage of development, landscape, and the power dynamics. Accra was established, or Accra was an entrepot port founded and controlled by indigenous Ghana states centuries before the establishment of colonialism. Kenya, on the other hand, was an inland entrepot which was established by British colonizers in the first decade of the 20th century. So this is Accra. The reason why I have this map here is to let you sort of see how different Accra was from Kenya. Accra, from Nairobi, Accra was on the coast of Ghana, and it sort of had these local settlements before the establishment of British colonialism. So you had Inleshi, which is Jamestown, to the west side, and then we had Kinka, which is also called Town. Then to the far west was Osu or Christianborg. In the middle was the European segregated quarter, which is a bit sparsely populated. Then you can see the pink sides that are like densely populated. This is a picture of Inleshi, which was one of the African settlements, and then the sea sort of like really close. So what I'm trying to say is that this would affect the development of these cities over time. This is also Kenya, Nairobi. The red part sort of shows the inland the inland location of Nairobi, and it's sort of like developed in a circular way, as sort of like when you compare it to Accra, which was sort of like towards the north. So if you look at the map, you see a circular development. You have the European segregated side to the west, and then Indians to the east, and then Africans to the southeast of Nairobi. So it was developing in a circular way. The reason I have this map again is that there was controversy. Now that Europeans were sort of like segregated in the middle of the African cities, it was very hard for them to expand horizontally or to expand towards the coast. So they had to take northeast direction for their settlement. I would argue that this sort of like dispute and then the creation of buffer zones in order to satisfy the sanitary arrangements at the time would make the settlement for upper class Europeans and Africans sort of move northeast, and then the development is almost the same as you go to Accra at the moment. Nairobi has an interesting case because the middle section, just the pink section, is some sort of the Indian bazaar that was there was so much controversy of it because it was endemic. It was a plague endemic place, and Europeans were sort of scared that if it expanded to the west where they would be infected, and to the south. So they advocated for the demolition, and Indians would further move to northeast, also creating some sort of a northeast development of a segregated Indian quarter. So all Africans that were located there were pushed to the southeast section of the town, sort of also creating a segregated quarter in Nairobi. So what I'm trying to argue here is that buffer zones were the town planning signature of sanitarians. Town plans, mainly done by sanitarians during this period, were a response to epidemics that threatened to destabilize the Second Empire. And also, I argue with this chapter that spatial arrangements in cities were mechanisms for excluding less privileged people from certain parts of the town. Thank you.
Yeah, this is really hard because the slides just keep going and you have to be ready for it. So before I click it, because then I'll be on the clock, I have a lot lot of information to get through in 6 minutes and 40 seconds, so I'm going to try to do that as concisely and fluently as possible. If it feels like I'm talking fast, it's because I am. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chelsea. I'm a third-year doctoral student in the PhD program in the Department of Anthropology, and also an MPH candidate at the Brown School. This summer, I began my preliminary fieldwork to understand the intersections of white space and ALS. ALS, or amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, is a progressive neurodegenerative disease that affects nerve cells in the brain and spinal cord. The life expectancy of a person with ALS averages about 2 to 5 years. Once ALS starts, it almost always progresses, eventually taking away the ability to walk, dress, speak, breathe, and it shortens your lifespan completely. So what's interesting about ALS and Lou Gehrig is that it's privileged a lot of white male bodies. As you guys see, physicist Stephen Hawking, Patrick O'Brien, sociologist Maury Schwartz, those are all white males that have kind of been the forefront of this disease. So I always put this slide up just to show, like, baby Chelsea has been doing ALS work for a really long time, before I had dreads. And so as a high school student here in St. Louis, that's how I personally got involved with it. So to my surprise, in 2014, the Ice Bucket Challenges happened. And I used to take 30 minutes to explain to everybody what ALS was, and now it's a household name. And so trying to understand, for me, why all of these former presidents, Bill Gates, Oprah, were all now dumping ice buckets over their heads, what did that mean? But at the same time, I started noticing that on social media, black friends of mine and some of my informants were saying, ALS is not a black disease. Social media users were upset and saying that most of y'all don't even know what bleep ALS is, but you're drowning yourselves in water. People were adamant that this disease didn't affect black people, so we shouldn't be involved in the cause and let alone raise any money for it. And so on the famous show Empire, Terrence Howard was diagnosed with ALS at the beginning of the show. And then even a journalist, Tariq Nasheed, and rapper Killer Mike argued that the Ice Bucket Challenge was a distraction from Mike Brown's killing, because this happened in 2014 about the same time that this was happening. So a chief research question for me has always been, where are the black people with ALS? I leaned on Elijah Anderson's concept of white space, which suggests that white space are overwhelmingly white spaces that black people have to navigate for survival. Often when black people navigate these white spaces, they feel marginalized, feel fearful, or simply like they don't belong. However, he suggests that black people still have to navigate this space for the sake of their survival here in the US. So one could argue that especially in health promoting spaces like hospitals and resource organizations, that black ALS patients would undoubtedly penetrate these spaces to get the medical health and community support that they needed to raise awareness about ALS. However, over the summer, I saw the opposite happen. I saw black people not penetrating these spaces. I attended the ALS Association's third largest walk in the entire country here in St. Louis, and 5,000 people were in attendance. It was so big that even the ALS CEO was there, and only six black people that weren't even patients attended this entire event. I went on to become a phlebotomist this summer so I could learn about ALS research and care in the hospital. I drew blood on over 100 white ALS patients or neuromuscular patients this summer, and only one person, a black 25-year-old man who was recently diagnosed with ALS, was a part of that group. I also attended several 5Ks and ALS Association walks. This one particular that you guys are seeing on the screen is in Kimmswick, Missouri, which raised over $25,000 in funds for ALS research. 2 black people were in attendance. Both of them were runners. They weren't patients themselves. And I noticed throughout the town that they all had these "We Support the Police" signs up in the area. These signs automatically suggest a negative attitude toward any person of color affected by police brutality. Are these safe spaces for black people with ALS? Because there certainly weren't any black patients here at Kimmswick, Missouri. Even the music was not diverse. The radio DJ played 127 songs while I was there from 5 a.m. to 10 a.m. And the only song they played that was by a black artist was the Cupid Shuffle. I'll see if this will play, because it made me laugh. Oh, I wish you guys could hear the volume. Just imagine the Cupid Shuffle, it's happening. And then the one girl you see in the back, that's one of the black supporters that I saw there. So quickly, I know you have 20 seconds to read this, but at the ALS clinic this summer, as I mentioned, there were 270 patients there. I only saw 3 that were black. The ALS walk, 5,000, only 6. The ALS post-walk celebration that I went to, 93 people in attendance, only saw 1 person. And similar with the 5K that I went to in Kimmswick, only 2 people in attendance. So at the end of 2016, the ALS Association pushes out there how many people they service their clients through their United Way report. And as you can see, there are 26 African Americans in the greater St. Louis area that do have ALS and use resources specifically with the ALS Association. So even accounting for maybe 5 patients dying, Anderson's white space framework should suggest that African American patients with ALS would be in these various spaces I observed this summer because they have to penetrate them. They have to go there, but they're not. So thinking about race and ALS isn't just like acute to just ALS. It's a broader phenomenon of diseases that have been typified as white diseases. ALS is not a white disease by any accounts. Several nonprofits are charged specifically with raising money, awareness, and treatments for ALS, but also have charged themselves with providing resources and information for all people that could be affected by ALS. And so given that ALS has no etiology, no known etiology, no cure, no effective treatment, everyone should be going to these spaces to seek care. But the reality is that in these brief conversations with black people this summer, they aren't penetrating these spaces. And so my research for my final dissertation is going in 3 different directions that I'd like to explore through ethnography with these various patients. I'd like to consider, time's up, but I'm gonna finish talking. One informant that I spoke to this summer suggested that black people aren't coming to these spaces because of the elitism of WashU specifically and the history of racism at Barnes Jewish Hospital. Others suggested that the history of experimentation on black people may keep them from participating in ALS research trials or the clinics in general. Others suggested that the various health disparities that African Americans already endure complicates the ways black people are surveilled and diagnosed with ALS. I hope that my dissertation explores some of these directions to better understand this scary and deadly disease that absolutely affects people of color. Thank you.
Well, hi everybody, I'm Francesca Denstedt and I'm in the Romance Language Department. In Mexico, there is an implicit relation between sex workers and gay males, since the latter are pejoratively called putos, which literally means male whore. Thus, sheer and unequal marginality of these queer subjects is the starting point of my project. La Zona Rosa is the first gay neighborhood of Mexico City, a place where sexual difference has been tolerated since the 70s, a tolerance that somehow reaches its peak with the approval of same-sex marriage in 2006. La Merced is one of the oldest traditional markets, and by this I mean with indigenous roots and also one of the biggest brothels in the world, where sex workers fight every day for their right to work. Prostitution remains illegal. What can urban planning, architecture, and space tell us about the current different outcomes of these 2 marginal queer subjects? Following Jack Halberstein, queer subjects encompass non-normative lives and logics, times, and spaces. Because of the work they do and the space they inhabit, outside logics of labor, sexual normativity, and urban planning, the sex worker can be a queer subject. The Zona Rosa and La Merced have very different histories. La Zona Rosa has aristocratic origins and its full or Porfirian-era mansions. The names of its streets serve as a reminder that this neighborhood was both a promise of modernity and cosmopolitanization in the post-revolutionary era. Since the 70s, La Zona Rosa is one of the major tourist pavilions. Currently, it is packed with currency exchange services, hotels, and franchises, such as Starbucks. It's always in constant renovation. This is like an actual picture of the street when I was there in Mexico City this summer, and it's being renovated because of the pipes or something like that. So you can actually see there, and you can see Starbucks and the hotels and everything. Behind the Zócalo and in the heart of Mexico City's historic center is La Merced, a space that since colonial times has been identified by its traditional trade and whose colonial structure remains almost intact. However, after a fire destroyed part of the market in 2013, a plan has been developed to gentrificate the area. The people of La Merced do not agree with this plan because no one has explained to them how will it affect their businesses. For example, in the original plan, the flower market disappears from the main market. Mainly, the gentrification plan seeks to clean the streets from any type of trade and present a more modern image of the market for touristic reasons. Nobody has considered how this will affect the sex workers, one of the largest populations of people working in the streets of La Merced. And here are like the two plans. The one on the left is how it is now, and the one on the right is the plan. And in the yellow squares, you can see how it's been like clean. Now, a brief history of queer gentrification through three iconic gay bars of Mexico City. El Bar El Nueve opened in the 70s with Mexican capital but was handled by foreigners. It was an exclusive bar that both functioned as a secure site for any type of non-normative subjects and as a place to promote a certain type of gay image, one in accordance with those of Western cities. After El Nueve, the same people inaugurated El Metal, a 3-story tall gay bar with a $6 million investment and with Andy Warhol originals hanging on the walls. After suffering innumerable police raids, the bar closed its doors. Now a strip club from an American franchise occupies the building. Gentrification has finally displaced LGBT subjects, only gays with certain capital frequent the area. But new places have emerged, such as El Marrakech Salon in the heart of the historic center. Another gay street has been built near La Merced, one that does not aspire to become global or cosmopolitan. On the contrary, it seeks to be a fair business by keeping the cost of beer low and by rejecting any type of exclusionary practices. For example, instead of Warhol originals, the bar is decorated with a mix of references to El Santo, a popular iconic Mexican luchador, and queer Mexican art. The remaining question is, how will the gentrification project of La Merced affect the sex workers laboring around the market and the surrounding plazas? If landscapes can also often hold together a past, a present, and a future, or all three at once, and if they are often understood as repositories of the past, holding history in their contours and textures, then the history and landscape of La Zona Rosa serve as an obvious warning, and yet no one takes it too seriously. Gentrification displaces the most vulnerable subjects. If in the past, gay constituted the capital to improve La Zona Rosa, now they have been consumed by it. An urgent question to ask is what will happen to sex workers that are inhabiting a space that holds a complicated history, where the colonial past is enacted in the present by projects that seeks to erase not only queer subjects, but indigenous and poor people too. The title of this project evokes the problem. For queer subjects in La Zona Rosa, gentrification meant either entering the global Western sphere or embracing a physical displacement to resist foreign invasion. For the sex worker, a queer subject with intersecting oppressions such as class and race, gentrification means hard erasure. The way both sex workers and gay males, both queer subjects, inhabit space, shapes their future. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Christine Doherty. I'm a Master's of Architecture and Master's of Urban Design student.
So my project is called 21st Century Educational Apartheid, and this actually started out as a study of school desegregation programs across the U.S. Oh, I went much faster. And then it turned into distinguishing what is currently identified as a diversity crisis in our public school system into what is actually an equity crisis in our public school system. But the intention of these desegregation programs is to give equity. They take a low-income, racially isolated student and put her into a high-income, good-quality school. And these programs have a plethora of benefits, and over 4 million students have been able to get better opportunities in their education because of them. And ideally, that is what Brown versus Board of Education was about. But looking at a city like St. Louis, so looking at these numbers on your left, we're doing a good job. We have good schools, and they're considered to be diverse by their socioeconomic and racial standards. But this disparity, shows that we didn't look at the problem correctly. And although we were right to say that segregating schools is wrong, it was through this isolated and step-by-step process we reached the point of perpetuating what was meant to be only a temporary fix to our school system today. So if we're going to look at the problem correctly, we need to address the root of the problem. And the root of that problem is systemic racism. And it's really important to include the word systemic in with racism at all times because it is so ingrained into our society, into every single institution. Looking at most recently criminal conviction, and also housing, healthcare, the first two ways of feminism, the right to peacefully protest. And the point is that each of these institutions serves as a basis for interlocking networks which can either strengthen or lessen the people of our country. But to start addressing these networks, we have to see how, this isn't an uphill battle. It's a series of counteracting legislative decisions. And most importantly, how in the early 20th century, there were these financial systems of assessing neighborhoods that created our segregated cities today. And specifically mechanisms such as the GI Bill and redlining, is really what created the white middle class we have right now. And that's why, without the ability to own property, you really can't invest over time. So these numbers here are a result of today's construct. And I only picked 4 categories that directly pertain to education, but these numbers really show not the competence of a people, but these numbers show a system that is so fine-tuned that one person can't defeat. So that leads us to this issue of double segregation we have today. It means that more often than not, our cities are not only racially but also socioeconomically segregated. And I went back. And the point of my project wasn't to show how the school system is going to fix, racial problems in our society, but it really is to show that our public school system is just one example of an institution that needs to be fixed and then we need to use a multitude of networks to address, and that can somehow make things a little bit different. And these numbers are just an example of 3 different cities that all have the same issue of white flight and urban renewal, which considered racial policies to be spatial progress. And they all tackled, their issues differently, but they also have separate, different issues in their segregation issues. So looking at Hartford just as one example, because Hartford has one of the oldest and longest desegregation programs in the country, and it's also because Hartford is a majority minority city and is also relatively poor, but the surrounding suburbs are very affluent and very white. So their program has a 2-way system which allows city kids to come out and then county kids to come in. But the issue is that they have to put actual numbers on what they define as diversity. And their first problem began when they said only 47.5% minority students deserve to receive a reduced isolated setting. That means that the other half of students they get completely overlooked. And even after that, the numbers get skewed. And the number one problem with this is that because it turns out just because you live in a city or just because you're black does not mean you're poor, and just because you're white or just because you live in the suburbs does not mean you're wealthy. And this shows that Hartford's program, much like many other programs, is a racially and spatially based system, and that's only for the primary reason that those dynamics are what formed our cities about 100 years ago. And even though racial isolation and socioeconomic isolation are intrinsically linked, We have to look at school equality through a lens of equity, not of racial diversity. So, many cities are already starting to do equity-based approaches. Right here in St. Louis, we have City Guard Montessori School. And it's a wonderfully progressive example, but it is also a privately funded charter school, and it's by no means systematic. So the solution clearly lies in finding a balance between these bottom-up tactics and addressing the public school system as a whole. And but what if we started by, instead of looking at racial diversity, we looked at inequity and how that affects the school's achievement rate. The number one reason why schools might not reach accreditation standards is because these kids come to school with their basic needs not met. So what if we allowed other programs to interact and allow those needs to be met as a part of the education system? And we can do that by through a needs of outreach programs. And the most enjoyable part of this summer for me was discovering Building Futures, which is an outreach program here, and it is not directly connected to the school system. But it really shows how either we can have these formal systems integrated with the public school system, and that can answer some issues, or as individuals we can get involved with our city systems and make a change, And I just wanted to end with, I wanted to include this quote just because we all have that power, within our hands and our minds to connect our resources with other people who might not have access to their resources. And it might be formal, it might be informal. But I think if we make our careers about an advocacy, we can really begin to change our cities. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Mine's a PDF, so I don't know. Is it going to automatically? I'm going to time it. I'll time myself.
Yeah, it's not.
Okay. I'll set this. Because it's not very many minutes. My name is Andrea Gottschalk, and I am a doctoral candidate in sustainable urbanism. And I'm so happy to be here to share this work with you all. Thank you for bringing your wisdom here today. And I'm going to try to share a lot. So I'm going to put some models in front of you that are kind of complicated, and I'm not going to be able to explain them. So just kind of look at them spaciously. And then if you're interested in this, I'm happy to talk more about it. So what I was up to, I got to go to Johannesburg this summer and investigate how group model building and community-based system dynamics might be applied to the design process to help spatial designers and stakeholders identify strategic leverage points to cultivate social and ecological resilience. System dynamics, which community-based system dynamics grows out of with a commitment to social justice, uses informal maps and formal models to reveal endogenous or internal system behavior to improve our mental models of problems and locate leverage points for intervention. So models are representations of real systems, like maps. They're a slice of reality. So because of that, they're not accurate, they're wrong. But some of them can be useful. So that's the context of this model building, or any model building. So I used applied community-based system dynamics methods to the design process in 3 ways: as a sketch tool, with studio pedagogy, and as a post-occupancy evaluation method. So just to get everyone kind of situated with what I'm talking about, this is Miso in the vest. She's a community organizer in Johannesburg, and she is trying to get this vendor who sells produce to people off the train in a very strategic place to stop dumping this refuge in a way that accumulates he's dumping it in a way that the city won't pick up. So basically, to read this model, the words are variables in the system and the arrows are relationships between the variables. So in a plus means that both variables are increasing or decreasing together. And a minus means that when one goes up, it pushes the other one down, or vice versa. That's the basic gist of these models. So that's as a sketch. Then, as a studio pedagogy, we did formal model building sessions with in alignment with the urban design studio that was in Johannesburg. So we followed the same series of scripts, starting with graphs over time, which is a way to generate the dynamic behavior of a system, and then use that to seed the model. So for the first one, it was climate change risks. For the second one, it was the number of informal vendors, street vendors. And so these are the models. And this one gave me, I would say, the most to think about in terms of setting it up to be successful, because urban designers, a good urban designer kind of looks at a lot of problems and challenges, and a strong urban design would stack the benefits in multiple, for multiple challenges. So, which at multiple scales. So, but the people that trained me in community-based system dynamics would kind of start with an isolated challenge and build the system focused on that challenge. So, figuring out how to isolate one problem in urban design is a challenge. But I think the third method can help inform how you might use that in an initial site analysis scenario, and that's by using it as a post-occupancy evaluation, looking at designs that have been implemented and how they affected the site dynamics. So I modeled some research on an informal football league that Professor Hannah LaRue did. This was an informal football league, and then during the World Cup event there was formal intervention, some formal investment, which I would say was a failed design because it kind of destroyed the league didn't survive the intervention. So I modeled what was happening on the site before the intervention and then what was introduced after the intervention, and sort of iterated Hannah's feedback on that model and integrated it. And then we were able to go out to the site with the model and iterate it again with these young men who were actually grade students when the intervention happened. And as you can see from the bottom photos, it was the site does not function at all in the same way. There's a bunch of informal commercial business has been stopped, and it's dangerous because the tufts of grass. So this is the third iteration of that model. And I see these applications being in kind of reinforcing each other and kind of building capacity and using the tools. Yeah, it was great. So I want to end with gratitude for the opportunity to do this, and also really to acknowledge Jean and Bruce for writing this grant specifically so that we get to focus on racial inequality and injustice. I think that was really wise, and I appreciate being able to see all this research on that. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Wei Liu, and I come from China. I'm a second-year doctoral student in sustainable urbanism at Stanford School. All right, so today I'm going to talk about my summer research. It's comparative analysis of the quality indicators in public space of the Central Corridor development in St. Louis, a case study of the social interaction between adults living in different neighborhoods. Long-distance interaction replaces physical social interactions as we are at the cutting edge of technology. So this study found the key factor that would positively bring people to public spaces. The challenges in St. Louis include the economics, racial segregation, the subdivisions of very concentrated poverty, communities facing high crime rates and lacking quality and basic services. The challenge will require a comprehensive plan that ranges from providing decent jobs to expand mass transit and access to public space. If public space cannot meet the requirements and the citizens and travelers, its negative impacts will be amplified. Today in St. Louis, the problem has become difficult for most kind of public space that were once for gathering and sharing values among people. So in this case, there are four sites that I select for the research. City Garden in downtown, Aloy Plaza in downtown west, Stroud Park in the Grand District, and Cortex Plaza in Cortex area are considered as these study areas. So first, I went through the characteristics of the great public place created by American Planning Association. Before the literature review, several keywords popped up. They are promoting social activities, safety, welcome people, visually interesting and well-maintained, etc. According to the literature review, there are four indicators of public space for improving social interaction discovered. The first is the reason to get outside in the public space. For example, accessibility and to public space and the mixed-use surroundings. A previous study concluded that walkable and mixed-use functions can encourage development of social interaction through analyzed levels of social capital in between living in auto-oriented neighborhoods and pedestrian-oriented mixed-use neighborhoods. The second factor is a sense of comfort in public space, like microclimate facilities. Comfort public space should be designed as environmental psychology friendly for pedestrians, for cyclists, dog walkers, families, and disabled. The third is a high level of safety in public space. For instance, active hours and lightings. The impact of physical and social variables on crime and insecurity is thoroughly mediating the social interaction. And the last one is an interesting intervention for entertainment within the public space for all people. The study measured and compared the quality indicators of the public space. I applied the survey method to measure public life in terms of counting people head, keeping a note, and randomly interview of the users in such places. I observed the public space to understand how people move and use the spaces. I counted people for 10 minutes each hour and 12 hours a day, both on weekdays and weekends. This procedure captures the volume of people spending time in the public space and diversity of stationary activities. Then I kept a note for anything unusual. The survey contains demographic information and a Likert scale of questions which allows each of the four quality indicators to be measured on an ordinal in a 5-point scale ranging from 1 to 5. After knowing the average number of people moving and using each place in a day, I conducted a random interview of 10% people. These interviewees, including citizens and visitors, were asked to complete the survey. They filled out how far away they traveled here and rated the public space with respect to the quality indicators. City Garden is seen as having the highest value in terms of overall scores, whereas Cortex Plaza was found as having the lowest score in terms of overall scores, but safety was found as the highest quality indicator within itself. There is a positive correlation between overall score of the public space and the number of people and travel distance. These figures help to understand the perceived quality of comfort and safety were not significant factor for people gathering together, and the perceived quality of reasons was a moderate factor. The perceived quality of entertainment was a significant factor. City Garden and Aloy Plaza attract people from various neighborhoods than Strassi Park and Quartet Plaza because they both have water features. Strassi Park attract people in some certain time because people come here for events and activities. The Quartet Plaza with well-designed landscape attract few people due to the place with limited parking space and no interventions. The findings of City Garden and the Strassi Park as high in quality in terms of entertainment compared to Aloy Plaza and Quartet Plaza are related to its programming and the shaded seating areas. Designing public space with comfort and safety could not be necessary, but indicators of entertainment and reasons of public space should be vital for people's interaction, socialization, and quality of life in the context of St. Louis region. St. Louis that has divided condition in racial and socioeconomic requires public space to create and encourage a public realm. So this study aims to better understand the necessary indicators for successful public space through an assessment of the public life. So this is pretty much I've done so far. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cesar Rodarte. I'm a dual degree with architecture and urban design. Oh, no. Okay, next try. Blurring the edge. Blurring the edge is a concept from the deeply connected and symbiotic urban relationship I witnessed growing up in El Paso, Juarez. The current political administration seeks to divide the so-called sanctuary cities, and this manifesto aims to uncover the true complexity of the cross-national cities along the U.S.-Mexico border. As a Mexican American born and raised in El Paso, Texas, crossing the U.S.-Mexico border became an everyday activity for me. At the time, I hardly realized that I was developing a binational identity as the socioeconomic and cultural landscapes of the two border cities are so similar. And yeah, that cutie pie is for you, by the way. So in order to understand the relationship between divided cities along the US-Mexico border, this report and this research was organized in 4 different scales. Kind of understanding the extra large scale, which is more the global scale, and what aspect our border plays in the world. The large, which is the national divide. Medium, couple of cities, in this case San Diego, Tijuana, and El Paso, Juarez. And finally, the small scale, focusing on some ports of entry along those 2 cities. So the brown line is a line that was drawn by William Brandt during the 1980s, which is trying to show the inequality between the global north and the global south. Mainly, or it's mainly known for being the rich north and the poor south. there's a lot of events throughout history that is starting to define what the U.S.-Mexico border became to be. So between war conflicts and border protection policies, the border had changed its boundaries throughout its history. And among the most important events along the border's history are the Texas independence for Mexico in 1936 and its incorporation to the Union in 1845. And after that, the Mexican-American War during 1946 and 1848, which led to the addition of California, Wyoming, Arizona, and New Mexico. But also it's really important to understand not only the physicality of the wall or this boundary, but also the importance of the Rio Grande, because the Rio Grande was the official boundary of the United States-Mexico border after the war. And throughout its history, the Rio Grande has shifted because of the condition of being a natural resource. So during the flood of 1864, the Rio Grande has shifted by almost 600 acres of uncovered land, and this became known as El Chamizal. Quote, "I'll build a great wall, and nobody builds walls better than me. Believe me, and I will build them very inexpensively. I will build a great, great wall on our southern border, and I will make Mexico pay for that wall. Mark my words." Quote, President Donald Trump, 2015. But how much would this great wall actually cost? What are the human and social implications of such an infrastructural divide? The following maps show the existing fence that divides both nations and the number of illegal immigrants apprehended for each of the border patrol sectors. The main focus of this mapping was to understand the intensity across El Paso Juarez border. Currently, there are 5 international ports of entry between El Paso and its sister city, Ciudad Juarez, 3 of which can accommodate commercial shipments. The map displays the racial distribution across El Paso, Texas. As you could see, Hispanics being the orange dots, cover almost between 80 and 89% of El Paso's total area. Such a statistic and fact support the strong cultural attachment between El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua across the river. Focusing on the other condition in San Diego and Tijuana, long crossing wait times between San Diego and Tijuana border has always been an issue. Perhaps because of poor port of entry design, traffic surrounds the San Isidro port of entry. The line to cross the border interferes with everyday life, becoming jams or kind of different urban conditions. The city of San Diego is relatively more diverse than El Paso. The population in San Diego is about 45% white, while Hispanic, Asian, and African American are 28%, 16%, and 6.9% respectively. So, but in order to start kind of having a better understanding of these cities, it's really important to put it in perspective and compare the size, the density, and the population of these cities in some cities that we're more familiar with, like Chicago and St. Louis. So this kind of map is trying to show the comparison on how these kind of cities or these kind of border plexes that are symbiotic to each other start to relate to the bigger picture in the United States. A border light survey was performed in the bridge of the Americas in El Paso and Juarez, and basically consistent in asking people crossing the border how many times they crossed or how often they crossed the border for, what was the purpose. This was the reasoning for that was to understand the human connection between like both cities. Similarly, in San Diego and Tijuana, there was a survey conducted just to test the time to cross between different cities. and then what happens along that time. So basically, crossing from San Diego to Tijuana took about half an hour, and crossing from Tijuana to San Diego was almost 2.5 hours. But the real interesting part of this is like the whole journey between crossing from one side to the other became this informal market when you have different activities or different goods that people are trying to sell to you while you're waiting your car. So today we live in a very segregated society, but the border in the other to the border acts as the basic line. But what if we can start to reimagine the border as its own? Can there be a future where sister cities are not separated but work as a single organism with a single economic, political, and infrastructural system? Perhaps we're closer to that day than we could ever imagine. During the preliminary analysis of the border, one strange case about the border was found: the division of Native American lands. The wall will separate Native American sacred lands, which impedes the free flow within their land. Such case was not investigated in detail due to the concentration on metropolitan areas, but it opens up the possibility for further exploration. I see historical and infrastructural divides every day right here in St. Louis. As I enter my design thinking research, I intend to continue my questioning and analysis of borders and divides. What is a boundary? What are borders? How are borders created? How are borders established, both visibly and invisibly? So this is kind of the process of kind of trying to develop 3 hypotheses of how can we start to develop or expand the notion of a border. How can a border, as I mentioned before, is an exchange zone rather than a divisive line? The opportunity granted to me by the Divided Cities Initiative and the Mellon Foundation has provided me with the background knowledge I need to continue exploring borders in our everyday life and to reimagine borders as these zones of exchange. I will continue this research as I complete my Master's of Architecture, and I hope to continue pursuing this research as I enter my career as an urbanist in architecture. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sarah Siegel. I'm a 5th-year PhD candidate in the History Department. And thank you to the Divided City Initiative for allowing me to do this research over the summer. So today I want to talk about a moment of possibility for North City, St. Louis. My dissertation explores the Model Cities program, a 1966 to 1974 federal anti-poverty program. And my dissertation asks, what happens when residents gain control over government resources for their neighborhoods? So I'll talk about how residents briefly in St. Louis won control of model cities and how they envisioned improving their physical and social surroundings. But first, a note on context. Mid-century urban civil rights protests around the country forced federal and local officials to be more open to resident voices, paving the way for programs like Model Cities. Further, one of the most important urban policies in the mid-20th century was urban renewal, which funded large demolition projects in cities that often tore down low-income neighborhoods, replacing them with higher-income housing and commercial space. And here's the infamous Mill Creek Valley in St. Louis. A third aspect to the context of model cities was President Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty, initiated in 1964. This initiative aimed to alleviate poverty for 40 million Americans. And due to civil rights movement demands for equality and power, War on Poverty initiatives experimented with citizen participation. So around the country, poor residents used this call for citizen participation to position themselves as vital leaders in their neighborhood. For example, during St. Louis's alleyway cleanup initiative of 1966, Jeff Vanderloo neighborhood leaders, including these 2 white Mennonite residents, organized a successful cleanup campaign. To kick off the program, the mayor had a giant broom made, which you can sort of see in the picture, and he made especially to provide for a good photo op. But shortly into the event, his broom broke, which one resident recalled, quote, "was a beautiful example of the powers that be. Their motivation was to put on a little show." That afternoon, community leaders showed the mayor around their neighborhood. The mayor repeatedly commented that he was afraid the area was unsafe, which bolstered the residents' bid for power. Residents argued they had special expertise by virtue of living in their neighborhoods, so their leadership was necessary to create successful anti-poverty programs. And this is where Model Cities comes in. The idea behind Model Cities was that interconnected programs combined with citizen participation would be the best way to fight poverty in urban neighborhoods. Once programs gained success, they could be expanded citywide, and residents argued they should control Model Cities planning. St. Louis broke its Model Cities area into 5 sub-neighborhoods: Yateman, Murphy Blair, Montgomery Hyde Park, Carr Central, and Pruitt-Igoe. Each neighborhood had its own resident corporation, which was in charge of writing a comprehensive plan for the area. I want to take a moment to highlight 2 leaders to give you a sense of who was leading these organizations. The first is Mackler Shepard, probably the best known. He led the Jeff Vanderloo organization in the Yateman neighborhood, and residents' memories of him are still overwhelmingly positive. He forced city officials to contend with him despite mutual distrust. And a second figure is named Bobby Westbrooks. So Westbrooks was the head of the Montgomery Hyde Park organization. He's seen here giving a list of demands by residents to the mayor. One of his lieutenants described him, quote, "He's militant in many ways, but it's a reasoned militancy. He's mad when he has reason to be mad." Resident organizations were intimately connected with local civil rights groups, including Black Power groups. Montgomery Hyde Park, for example, boasted that one of its board members was also involved in the Black Liberators, a local Black Power group similar to the Black Panthers. Leadership in the city's Model City Agency evolved, but at first the agency strongly supported residents' bid for control over model cities. For example, Margaret Bush Wilson, seen here, was a prominent civil rights lawyer and served as acting executive director when residents wrote their plans, and she championed resident autonomy. So to get the word out about model cities, a resident-written publication called the Model City Voice was published. Though residents' articles expressed skepticism about whether the federal program would really allow them autonomy, they were hopeful and tried to grow resident support. To write their plans, resident organizations held hundreds of planning meetings. They crafted interconnected proposals for housing, physical redevelopment, healthcare, education, job training, and recreation. They stressed the ways in which their planning embodied democratic decision-making. Residents explained their commitment to a democratic process. Subcommittees would draft proposals, and the whole neighborhood organization would vote. The Board of Aldermen then approved the proposals and sent them to the Department of Housing and Urban Development for review and funding. Residents knew they didn't have the technical expertise to craft all of their plans by themselves. So they employed what were called advocate planners. And here you can see residents evaluate architectural models that were designed by Washington University students. Residents' clearest vision for their neighborhood came through their housing programs. Instead of tearing down houses, as was typical with urban renewal, neighborhoods asked for funds to rehab homes and sell them at low cost to residents, utilizing federal low-income home ownership programs. The woman who bought this renovated house in 1969 still lives there. Residents' housing plans argued that low-income home ownership was the best way to upgrade the neighborhood for current residents. They asserted that having resident organizations in charge of the entire rehab process would ensure that residents themselves would be the primary beneficiaries of Model Cities funds. These plans were a triumph for the neighborhood, but at that very moment, the federal government was backing away from citizen participation.
The result was an incomplete and stunted implementation of residents' vision. And this is epitomized in my final image, a house a neighborhood organization renovated lying vacant, as do so many in the model neighborhood. Thank you.
Hi everyone, good night. My name is Jose Sullivan. I'm a second year student in the Spanish PhD program. I'm from Chile. I'm going to talk about a little bit about my country. So, what you should be seeing, it's a painting of the foundation of Santiago, Chile's main city, in 1542. Here you can see Pedro de Valdivia, the Spanish conqueror, founding my country's capital city, Santiago. Here you can appreciate one of the most characteristic geographical features of Santiago, the Mapocho River. So the city of Santiago was founded and designed around the Mapocho River, a river that worked both as a water supply and as a city limit. In the center part of the map you can see the main city with the main plaza in the center. The river is the line that marks the north limit of the city. Here, in another map from the 18th century, you can appreciate how the river worked as a geographical limit of the city, but also as a symbolic limit. The part of the city beyond the river was called La Chimba, which means literally the other side. It was a place completely opposed to the city. It didn't have any urban development. It was mainly big lands used for agricultural purposes. The river worked both as a physical but also a symbolical limit to the expansion and growth of the city. From its foundation through the 19th century, Santiago did not grow significantly to the north side. Instead, it expanded through the southern lands of the valley. La Chimba, the other side of the valley, was a faraway place with almost no access. But from the 1880s through the first part of the 20th century, a major urban transformation of the city, led by the city's mayor Benjamin Vicuña Maquena, began, and it had the river as one of its most important features. One of the first improvements that was the tajamares, a wall that helped agricultural commerce people to cross the river in the summer months, connecting the huge lands of the north with the rest of the city. Here you can see a picture of those, a painting. The other key improvement done by the city mayor was to build a bridge that could connect the north side of the city, but also one that could hold the huge growth of the river during the winter. This one is one of the Mapocho River most emblematic bridges, the Calicanto Bridge, named after the lime and corners used in its construction. Another important improvement was the canalization of the river, especially for the winter overflows and floods provoked by the excess of water that affected almost every construction place near the river. A huge investment was made in order to connect the north part of the city with its main area, and the river played a central role in achieving that goal. But besides this transformation and urban improvements of the river and the change on the uses the river had, the symbolic and literary representations of the river still portrays it as a limit, a huge segregation mark, even as a boundary. So I asked myself, why? So during the summer, I studied a wide corpus of Chilean novels and fiction where the river played a somewhat important role. Here you can see 3 of them, among many others. Starting with Juana Lucero, published in 1902, El Río, the river, published in 1961, and Mapocho, published in the year 2002. I expected to find differences on the uses of the river in different years, in the different novels. Differences in the uses as a limit, as a character even, as space, place, or even as a landscape. But I found that all of these novels and fictions use the river as a metaphor of the segregation that characterizes Santiago and Chile, especially through the 20th century. So, what I found is, in spite the river's role changed after the improvements done by the beginning of the century, these novels were still using it as a segregation metaphor. to speak about Chile's inequalities. As you can see here, Chile is one of the most unequal countries in the Western world, which has major impacts on how people live and experience cities. For example, here you can see how urban green areas are distributed in Santiago. This is one of many forms to graphic how segregated is the city I grew up. While the richest part of the city have a great amount of urban green areas for recreational use, the poorest districts of the city have almost no parks. But segregation is also constructed in a somehow symbolical way. For example, in Santiago, almost every graveyard, cemetery, mental hospital, and some state prisons are located in the other side of the river, representing a city for the dead, the mental ill, or the one outside the law. So for me, these novels and fiction remind us that symbolically charged places must be understood within a context of constant struggle and reformulation. Chilean literature remind me that we cannot stop fighting for the meaning and uses of these places. So although Santiago is not a divided city in the most obvious ways, literature calls our attention to places that need to be constantly rethought. For example, a debate took place in Chile in the past 10 years, since the government tried to decide how to use the space of the river. One of the projects, this one, was to build a really long bikeway across the riverside. Instead, the government made up public tenders for the construction of a huge highway that connected the richest part of the city with the airport and the roads outside the city, segregating entire neighborhoods and making a powerful statement that the car was the privileged means of transportation in a country where not everyone can afford a car. So this picture is a picture of the last flood caused by the river's growth in 2016. This happened because the construction sites for the highways weren't prepared for the overflow, affecting mainly small shop owners. So can we learn something from the comparison between the ways in which literature portrays our cities and our urban recent history? I think we can take a very important lesson. Segregation is not only about space, but also about how places are represented and thought. What a place means, how a place is depicted, can help us to decide how a place can be used in the future. Thank you very much.
Hi. Finally. Okay. My name is Xichun Wang, and I am a doctoral student in Stanford School, and my research subject is basically focused on energy and urban form and how this interaction to kind of get improved and making our city more sustainable. So thanks to the divided city, they gave me the opportunity to do this research. And all of this research comes based upon our perception about the upgrading population in these informal settlements. And also electricity is being regarded as a precondition for these settlements to sustainable develop. But what is this kind of informal settlements looks like today? One of the ongoing projects is regarding to the upgrading, which means to provide them this kind of basic services in general. But it has been criticized regarding to its overemphasis on physical improvement. So it comes out to argue, is it necessary to take into account of this urban form and how is that going to influence the local living here locally? So we need to find out one of the settlements for further investigation. So that's how we join now. So what do? We decided to systematically hanging out in Johannesburg in general. So all of these slides means one trip that we have taken during this summer. And basically the red line means one of the settlements we had routinely get involved and interview with people. And also the process get in contact with a lot of local residents. So to give a big picture of what is the electrification taking place in South Africa, basically it is a process from this kind of formalized housing with electricity all the way to institute electrification which means to give you electricity locally in this settlement. What does that mean? So you need to imagine like you are living in one of the settlements. You are unsuitable, and there is no long-term plan to give you housing in general. So it's pretty sad actually. But that got improved after 2014 when the city decided to approve the policy providing electricity. So how many types of electrification has taken places? The first type is regarding to the upgrading project, which intends to be relocating. The second time is happening in the city when the city decided to re-electrify the hydraulic building. And the third type is the institute, which means to give you electricity without moving. So this is the first type of electrification. The backyard indicating the vacant zone that used to look slightly informal settlements in front of you on your left side. And when the neighborhood being relocated to the formalized housing on the right side, the local culture has been eradicated. But the third type of electrification, which we are more interested in, is establishment. It's a major case we've been studied. It has up to 7,000 households here, and it is one of the major projects here in Tembeliche after 2014. So we want to get involved to know what's the background of this. So this kind of settlement is not expected to exist today. But based upon the increasing population, the governments, they cannot kind of give you electricity because it has been rendered undevelopable regarding to each vulnerable geographic condition. So we get involved to complete up to 77 interviews during this process, and all of the spots has to be identified here. And we want to know the quality of supply. We want to know how it has impacted, what's the pros and cons. And basically also we want to know the transition of urban form. What we have found out, we realize even the neighborhood is with frequent blackout, which means 10 times of blackout per month. And it may take time for 1 month and 1 week to recover. The population still think they have a good quality of supply. And also, what would they complain? They think it's no disadvantage actually because from the installation all the way to consumption, the thing is good, but this kind of disadvantage means like sometimes they are facing unstable supply, which means unstable supply is not really a big problem because that's better. So what's the concern? They think it's too expensive. Yeah, surely in Johannesburg, the tariff per unit increased when the consumption increased. So when a lot of households were first forced to stay together using 1 meter, it's going to be expensive. So what's that feeling in them in general? We realize up to 70% of the household, they think the city is no more divided, just based upon the provision of electricity. So they're looking forward with this kind of localized housing here. So this picture shows they try to rebuild that together by themselves. But in terms to be the conclusion of suggestion, what can we provide? Since this place is rendered undevelopable, so it is necessary to give them water and sewage in long term to eliminate this kind of sense of divided. In terms to be the transition of urban form, we identified 4 different types of electrification, how is that impact? And all of them comes with the following social influences as well. But the most interesting one is the emerging confidence you can see from the upgrading of the cell building. So what has this impact on me? I think the divided city gave me the opportunity to understand how energy get involved and how is that going to impact them. And also you can see the construction of social capital through the process. And sometimes sustainable urbanism seems to be achieved just based upon the provision of basic services. I want to end in my presentation with this picture showing all the participants that have still joined me through the process. During the process, taking a picture there is a precious stuff. It is. And they want to be seen. Just they hope Tembeliche should become a township one day. And I hope we will be pleased to see it become a better city for better life. Thank you.
All right, let's give our graduate fellows another round of applause. That was really impressive.